today what I might do is just start off by giving you an overview of what I was going to talk about. So just go through the new service model, what the NDIS is actually all about, how to apply for the NDIS, getting an NDIS plan, and then what to do once you've got it. Okay, so as was mentioned, I'm from Catholic Care in Wollongong. We're a not-for-profit organisation who have been running for just over 20 years, supporting people with a range of different support needs in the community. So we offer support to people through counselling, foster care, marriage counselling, and we run a number of aged and disability services as part of that. So in the last few years, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the NDIS, but basically what has happened is the government in the past has funded organisations such as Catholic Care to provide services to people with disability. In the past, what has happened is that they've been block funded and organisations have been given a sum of money to provide the services that they believe are needed for people in the community. The NDIS totally turns that around and puts the power back to the individual. So instead of organisations being funded a block of money, now the individual is funded based on what their support needs are. So once somebody is funded under the NDIS, it's their responsibility to go out and get the services that they require. For individuals, it's a fabulous turnaround because it means that you don't have to fit into the box of what organisations say that you need. You can go out with your funding and be able to get the supports that you actually need. But like anything, it's not a simple process. So applying for the NDIS, the criteria that they give is quite vague. But in saying that, to actually get through and be able to be on an NDIS plan, you have to meet some quite kind of specific criteria as well. So you must be aged under 65 to apply for the NDIS. You must live in Australia and have Australian residency. And you must usually require support from a person because of a permanent and significant disability. So as you can see, it's quite an ambiguous statement because a lot of people will fall under that. You may use special equipment because of a permanent and significant disability, and you may require support from someone to reduce your future needs. So applying for the NDIS. I think that this, in all the people that I work with, this is the most difficult part of the situation. People get quite overwhelmed with the application process, but if we break it down into steps, it's actually not a hard process. It's just about collecting the right supporting documentation to give you the best chance to getting onto the NDIS. So the things that generally you need to collect to be able to apply for the NDIS are different reports from different health professionals to support your application. So it's about looking at how your diagnosis impacts on your day-to-day life. So things like paediatrician reports, functional assessments from an OT, school reports for kids that are still at school, social workers or neurologist reports. It really depends on the actual condition and what reports are going to best show the application process what your support needs are. So once you've collected supporting documentation, the next step in the process is actually contacting the NDIA. So they are the National Disability Insurance Agency who implement the scheme. They have a big long form that needs to be filled in from a health professional that outlines what your diagnosis is, how that diagnosis impacts on your mobility, your communication, your learning, your self-care, social interactions, and your ability to make decisions about problem solving. So obviously, depending on anybody's particular condition, one or more of these may be more impacted due to their disability. Okay, so once you have this access request form and it's completed, it's simply a submission to the NDIA. They will, like any government department, decide how long it's going to take. One person may be waiting a month for an outcome, the next person may wait 6 months. So it's really just, I guess, the luck of the draw when it comes to getting an outcome. If you're unsuccessful, generally you are notified much sooner and asked to provide additional documentation, or that they may say that you have not met eligibility criteria. If approved for the NDIA, the next step in the process is that they will contact you for a planning meeting. So the planning meeting is the opportunity to talk about your goals and what you want to achieve in your day-to-day life. It's where you would set where the money would be allocated if you were approved for a plan. And once you receive the plan, that's when you can start accessing additional support services. So this is just a quick example of a plan. What the NDIA do when setting the plan is allocate money in different areas. So they don't just allocate a whole sum of money, they allocate it to specific areas related to the goals that are identified in that planning process. So the things that may be funded within the NDIS are supports that they identify as reasonable and necessary. So it's things that are going to help you achieve your goals. In order for them to be reasonable and necessary, they have to relate to the person's disability. They do not include things that are daily living costs, so they're not going to pay for your shopping or for you to go to the movies. They have to represent value for money, so they're not going to pay ridiculous amounts of money for something that shouldn't be costing that much money. And they must take into account informal supports. So they also look at what family involvement and other informal supports that you might have in place. So the types of things that could be funded are things like daily personal activities, so personal care if you needed assistance with showering or getting ready in the mornings, transport to enable people to be able to access the community either socially or for employment. They fund therapeutic supports, so psychology, speech, occupational therapy, physio, any kind of allied health that's needed. Job readiness programs, help with household tasks, mobility equipment, and home and vehicle modifications. The NDIS is very clear in what they don't fund. So again, like most other departments, it's very clear about what is the responsibility of the NDIS and what's the responsibility of the health department. So anything directly related to health will always get pushed back to health. The same with education. So the NDIS looks at what is the education's responsibility when it comes to someone's disability. Things like teachers' aides and general supports that are needed while somebody's at school or in any kind of education will get put back to the education department. Okay, the reason that I came here today. So I became involved with Fabry a little on 12 months ago when I met somebody with Fabry who, when I heard of the condition, obviously it was something that I had to go and Google and find out more about. And I contacted Fabry Australia to find out a little bit more about it, to see if you had had any experience with the NDIS, because the person that I was working with was definitely eligible in terms of what his support needs were, but wasn't accessing any supports outside the health system at that stage. At that point, the person that I had spoken to had said no, that nobody had had any kind of dealings with it, and that's why I guess I wanted to come here today and let you know that most definitely there's a lot of people in this room that would probably be able to access the NDIS. So the young person that I'm talking about was a 16-year-old male attending a high school with his father providing most of his care for him. So as part of our application, What we had to do was obviously get that access request form that I had spoken about before, and getting his GP to fill that in. As part of filling that in, what we did was we went through the entire form and looked at what it really means in terms of people's communication, mobility, how Fabry is actually affecting him in his day-to-day life in all of those areas. We organised a full functional assessment by an occupational therapist. I find that the occupational therapy functional assessments, particularly for people with a physical disability, are going to paint the best picture about what impact that's having on everybody's day-to-day life. It looked at all areas of his life, from his home life, from travelling to school, from how it impacted on his social life, and also once he was at the home, what kind of things might be able to put in place to make that a little bit easier for him. We also had a letter from the school counsellor which outlined how Fabry was actually impacting on him while he was at school, and how it impacted on the fact that he couldn't participate in certain activities and access different things within his time at school. We went through the planning process, so it took about 3 months for us to get back approval for his plan, and then attended his planning meeting where we looked at what his goals were, what sort of things he really wanted to achieve that at the moment he just didn't have those extra supports in place to achieve. So the things that we got approved for in his plan were 50 hours of therapy. So we looked at implementing some occupational therapy ongoing and also some psychology for him. 20 hours of exercise physiology. So he now has somebody come out to him once a week to look at setting up a bit of an exercise plan to help with weight management, but also looking at his particular condition and what type of exercise is going to work best with him. We were approved for support coordination, which is an area where it's like case management, where somebody can be there to help him implement these services. We got 30 hours of social support, so that means that he can go out and attend some different social groups. At the moment we're looking at some groups in his local area where he can connect with other young people, because at the moment he's actually quite socially isolated. He's not getting out and about as much as what he'd like to. We also got some funding for a manual wheelchair. He had been using a wheelchair that the hospital had given him for a long time, so now we're looking at getting that wheelchair funded by the NDIS for him to be able to keep. And the other part of it, which was really exciting for the family as well, is we got some funding to get some quotes and some plans drawn up for some home modifications. So at the moment his bathroom is not overly accessible and has a lot of trouble getting in and out of the shower. So the NDIS would like us to go out and get the quotes and look at the recommendations, with the plan that in the next plan we'll be able to implement some of those changes. And that's all. I'm going to hang around over afternoon tea, because I know that people, once they hear NDIS, have lots of questions about it. So if there's anything that comes up, feel free to come and have a chat.